Imagine finding yourself trapped on a remote island, surrounded only by the roar of the ocean waves and the soft swaying of palm trees in the breeze. The ship that carried you just days earlier now lies in ruins, smashed against nearby rocks. You're the sole survivor of your entire crew. With scarce supplies and no chance of immediate rescue, you're thrown into the ultimate survival challenge, depending solely on your cleverness and unwavering will to stay alive. This was the reality faced by Pedro Serrano, a man whose astonishing tale has echoed through history for more than 450 years. Come with us as we explore Pedro's remarkable struggle against hunger, loneliness, and the unforgiving forces of nature. Pedro Serrano, Into the Deep. Due to the ancient nature of this story, there is very limited verified information about Pedro Serrano's birth or early years. What is known is that, sometime in the mid-16th century, this Spanish sailor joined the crew of a merchant ship heading across the Atlantic Ocean toward the Americas. But what was meant to be a routine journey soon turned into a nightmare. One stormy night, a violent tempest struck the vessel, destroying it completely. Every soul on board was lost, except Pedro. A strong swimmer, Pedro was able to battle the rough sea and reach a remote, barren island located off the northeastern coast of South America, far removed from any common maritime route. Though the island's exact identity remains uncertain, many believe it was likely Serra Bank, a small sandy atoll in the Caribbean Sea. When Pedro awoke the following day, the full weight of his situation hit him. The island was lifeless, offering little more than some patches of grass and a few scattered trees. The worst part? There was no source of fresh water anywhere on the island, significantly lowering his odds of survival. Determined to stay alive, Pedro began thoroughly exploring the island and the nearby coral reefs, desperately searching for food. He managed to find a few shellfish, which he ate raw, as he had no way to cook them. This gave him enough nourishment to survive the first few days, but he quickly understood that he would need a consistent and lasting source of food if he wanted to endure more than a few weeks on this sandy, isolated place. Fortune eventually favored him. During one of his explorations in the shallow waters of a nearby lagoon, Pedro noticed several turtles gliding gracefully near the shore. He knew this could be his chance. They would likely come ashore during the night to lay their eggs. As evening settled in, Pedro took shelter behind a rocky section of the beach and waited silently, surrounded by darkness and anticipation. Hours crawled by, and the night thickened. Then, finally, the turtles began emerging from the sea, slowly dragging their heavy bodies onto the sand. Armed with a knife, the only tool he'd managed to save from the shipwreck, Pedro sprang into action. He successfully caught and killed several turtles. Their meat became his main source of sustenance, while their shells proved useful for other survival needs. Harvesting rainwater, a rare lifeline. Creating fire. What started as a few difficult days gradually stretched into weeks and then dragged into months. Pedro was at the mercy of the unforgiving elements, with no shelter to shield him from the blazing sun or the violent storms. His survival hinged on two things: turtles that occasionally crawled ashore and the rainwater that pooled in their empty shells during heavy showers. As time crawled by, Pedro relentlessly searched for a way to produce fire. He knew it was not just vital for cooking his food, but it also offered hope, a chance to catch the eye of a passing ship. The beach was littered with seaweed, broken pieces of driftwood, and scraps from shipwrecks, plenty of materials that could feed a flame. But without flint, all that fuel was useless. He had a knife that could work as steel, but the missing piece was a proper stone. Unfortunately, the island was nothing more than a stretch of sand, bare and merciless, offering no flint or hard stone in sight. Determined, Pedro combed through every corner of the island daily, searching inch by inch for a suitable rock, but his efforts were in vain. Unwilling to give up, Pedro turned his attention to the ocean. An experienced diver, he began exploring the seafloor, scanning every patch for a stone that could spark. After numerous dives, he finally discovered two stones that seemed promising. Their texture and appearance offered a glimmer of hope. He brought them ashore, grinding them until they formed sharp edges. With dried seaweed he had already gathered, Pedro now had the components for his fire. He struck the stones against the blade of his knife. Many tries passed with nothing but frustration, until at last a spark flew, landing on the tinder and setting it ablaze. The fire came alive, crackling in triumph, a small yet powerful breakthrough in Pedro's lonely fight for survival. For the first time in many months, Pedro savored a warm meal. That simple comfort reignited a sense of hope in his desolate world. 3 long years crawled by on the isolated island. During that time, Pedro's clothing had all but disappeared, and his hair and beard had grown untamed. His body, shaped by the environment, developed a rough layer of hair that offered minimal defense against the weather. He often spotted ships far off in the ocean, but despite his efforts to signal them, none ever responded. The isolation was overwhelming, and we can only imagine the emotional toll. Days blending into each other, surges of hope at the sight of a distant vessel, and the crushing disappointment as it sailed away without noticing him. Then, one unforgettable morning, Pedro was suddenly roused from sleep. Rubbing his eyes in the smoky haze of his campfire, he froze in shock. Just beyond the rising smoke, a human face stared back at him, an image so unexpected it nearly stole his breath away. The man Pedro encountered turned out to be a fellow Spaniard. He had been shipwrecked just the night before and had stayed alive by holding onto a piece of driftwood until the ocean carried him to the island. As he drew nearer, both men were overcome with fear. The newcomer was startled by Pedro's wild, unkempt look, while Pedro, having been alone for years, was stunned by the sight of another human being. For a brief, terrifying moment, he thought the figure before him might be a ghost or a trick of the mind. In their panic, both men turned and fled in opposite directions, each suspecting the other was a demonic illusion. Pedro, terrified, cried out to the sky, pleading with God for protection from what he believed was a phantom. Hearing Pedro's desperate voice, the stranger halted. The language and the desperation struck a chord. "Brother," the man called out, "don't be afraid of me. I'm a Christian, just like you, I believe." Hearing those words, recognizing both the faith and humanity in the stranger's voice, Pedro calmed. The two shipwrecked souls began a new life together. They divided their daily chores, tending the fire, gathering seaweed, catching fish, and collecting driftwood. With their combined efforts, they were now strong enough to flip over even bigger turtles, which gave them a more dependable source of food. The years crawled by, 4 more to be exact. Together, they often watched from the shoreline, eyes fixed on the far-off horizon, praying a passing ship would see their smoke signals. But ship after ship sailed on without noticing. Then, one day, a vessel came nearer than any had before. The two men rushed to feed the signal fire, hoping this time they'd be spotted. And finally, they were. A small boat detached from the ship and began rowing toward the island. Overcome with joy and desperation, Pedro and his companions sprinted across the beach to greet their rescuers. But their wild appearance, long hair, shaggy beards, and worn-out bodies startled the sailors. At first glance, they thought some kind of creatures were rushing toward them from the wilderness. Pedro and his friend quickly called out in Spanish, trying to calm their fears. Slowly, the sailors realized that these weren't monsters, but fellow countrymen. 2 Spaniards who had endured years of solitude. The men were brought aboard the ship, which was heading back to Spain. During the journey, Pedro recounted the astonishing story of how he managed to survive for 7 long years on a remote and lifeless atoll. Tragically, his companion wasn't as fortunate. The toll of years spent in harsh isolation had weakened him, and he didn't survive the voyage home. Alone once more, Pedro bore the sorrow of their shared ordeal, the suffering they had endured together, and the memories that would forever remain with him. Upon reaching Spain sometime after the year 1550, Pedro was finally reunited with his family, who had long thought he'd perished at sea. He continued to share his incredible survival story for the rest of his life. A tale of extraordinary human perseverance in the face of impossible odds. Pedro Serrano's experience serves as a chilling reminder of the fragile line separating life and death, and the unimaginable strength a person can summon to stay alive. His story, preserved in the Royal Commentaries of Peru by Garcilaso de la Vega, stands as a lasting tribute to the endurance of the human spirit and the instinct to survive against all odds. Thank you for being part of this remarkable journey. If you found this tale moving, don't forget to subscribe for more true accounts of survival and human courage. Until we meet again, take care and stay safe. Thanks again for watching.